First and foremost, I want to thank you all for carving out time out of your busy day and week to hang out a bit with me. I'm DeMarcus Lloyd on the customer success team, and my job over the next 45 minutes is to make one idea concrete for you, and that's documentation that keeps itself current. Almost every docs problem comes down to a single structural fact. Docs are written at a moment in time, but the product they describe actually never stops moving. And so you have things such as code being shipped, API changes, features getting renamed, workflows getting rebuilt. The moment the docs are published, the product starts walking away from them. And that distance between what your product actually does today and what your docs says it does is what I'll call basically a communication gap. And it's not a sign of a lazy team or a bad writer or anything of the sort. It's just the default outcome of writing being a manual one-time act while the product is a continuous moving thing. And so the question this session answers is, what if maintenance actually stopped being something a person has to remember to do and instead happened as a byproduct of the work your teams are already doing? That's merging code, answering questions, shipping releases. That's really the shift from docs you maintain to docs that maintain themselves, and what makes the title literal. And so here's how we'll get here first. First, we'll talk about the why. So I'll show you what the real cost of the gap is and why it grows sharper each year. But first, let's take a look at the agenda. So from an agenda perspective today, as mentioned, I'll first cover the why. I'll show you the real cost of the gap and why it's grown sharper this year, especially now that most of the traffic reading your docs actually isn't human. Then we'll talk about the how. So what an automation actually is. I'll do two live demos, one out of the box demo, or excuse me, one out of the box functionality, and I'll show you also a custom automation. We'll also talk about the Slack agent that's really meant to help close the loop on the conversational side as well. And then we'll finish with the single automation that I'd have you all turn on first so that you all leave with the concrete next step. Throughout the course of the time today as well, we'll keep the room open for questions. So if anything is unclear, feel free to drop any questions that you have throughout the chat. All right, let's get started. So let's start with why this is actually worth your time. So quick post check. Who has opened their docs this month and has found something wrong? That could be an endpoint that changed, some stale screenshots from several versions ago. It could be a change log that stopped being updated about a couple of quarters ago, or even maybe sometimes like your translations are just lagging from the original English translation. None of this is bad intent. In fact, engineering ships and updating the docs is always someone else's jobs later. And really that lag between shipping and documenting is really the whole problem and exactly why what automations aim to close. So I'll just do a quick poll. I'm very curious from folks on the call today, which of these four areas actually hits closest to home for your team? Awesome. Based on folks on the call today, it looks like docs lagging behind is the number one pain point, which is very timely, as I'll also touch on this later today with the recommended automation. So there's really two numbers that sort of reset the stakes here. 84% of developers now use AI, but only 29% actually trust its output. And that's from last year's Stack Overflow developer survey. And by our own Mintlify data, over 62.5% of documentation traffic is actually now agents, not people. And so when we put those two together, developers are already skeptical of what AI is telling them. And what AI tells them increasingly comes from your documentation. And so when a doc is wrong, an agent doesn't file a ticket or email support, it usually silently hands the developer either the wrong answer, it writes broken code against your API, which confirms exactly why that distrust is hovering around that 29% number that was captured last year. The thing to think about here also is stale docs used to cost you maybe one or two confused readers at a time. Now it's also costing you every agent-mediated interaction downstream. And as a consequence of that, right, a little more developer trust each time. So what we've seen time and time again, there's a fundamental difference in what shapes successful teams. Typically, teams that get stuck are those that are treating docs as a release afterthought. So maybe the change log slides to, you'll get to it when you get to it. Everything sort of bottlenecks through one or two technical writers. And then you have things like links, translations that usually quietly suffer over time. Thriving teams invert that model. So docs updates work from what's already happening. The changelog drafts itself on a cadence, and anyone can contribute straight from Slack, and audit runs continuously run in the background. What that helps ensures is that the writer's time goes to actually what's required of a writer, focusing on the more interested things that I'd argue, right? Focusing on the voice, the structure, the positioning of the documentation, not on janitorial cleanup. And so here's the thing, the difference isn't effort or headcount. Both teams work hard. It just boils down to whether maintenance is manual or automatic. So let's actually take a look at how automation works inside of Mintlify. So the simplest way to think about it, an automation is just a team member or a teammate who never forgets the documents. Every automation is comprised of three parts. So first, we have a trigger. This can be either a scheduled cron job or a push to a repository on a branch. Second, you have the context. That's the repositories the agent is going to clone. It'll then read to understand what actually changed. And then third is the action. So that's allowing the agent to either open a pull request for you to review or pushing those changes directly to your deployment branch. The thing here is that you choose the trigger and the update model. Mintlify supplies the tested prompt in between, and that's essentially the whole model. And everything else today is basically going to be a variation of these three pieces that we'll talk about. So how does it kind of work under the hood? First, the trigger fires. So again, this is going to be on a merge or a scheduled cron job or scheduled run. What will then happen is then a sandbox agent will then spin up. It'll clone your docs plus any additional context repos that you all configure, and it'll disappear when it's done. What it's doing in the background during that time is actually building context. So it's going to read the diffs to see exactly what changed. It then writes the doc updates on your behalf, and that's going to be guided by any built-in prompting that you all do, plus any additional instructions that you've added. Then, per the update mode that you all set, it'll open either a PR, again, pull request for you all to review, or it'll push into your deployment branch automatically. The thing I want you all to notice here in terms of what's missing is a new pipeline, because it's not needed. The agent is going to detect automatically how your team already ships and works within those confinements. When you think about sort of the design choices, there's really three choices. And some of these may look like constraints, but they're actually why a lot of teams that are leveraging automations trust this model. So first is a review first. So again, by default, the agent opens a pull request and never writes straight to your production environment, and nothing ships without your approval. Second, it adapts to how you ship, not the other way around. So your triggers, your branches, your review flow all stay exactly where they are. Third, and you'll see this as part of the demo today, right? It's built on a docs as code model. So basically every change that the agent makes is a normal git commit, which for you all means it's going to be versioned, diffable, and revertible. And if something's wrong, similar to any other commit, you have the option to also roll it back. So when it comes to what actually automations can do, think of this more as like a menu, not a list. You all, especially for your organizations, you won't use everything on this screen here. But the idea here is that these are basically the pre-built automations that we provide for you in the Mintlify platform, and they fall into two groups. So for your code-based automations react to your product changing. So think about docs drafted when pull requests merge to your product repo, or changelog entries drafted on a schedule from a recent update that occurred. The other category is maintenance automations. And maintenance automations keep what's already published healthy. So think about your translations, your broken links, your SEO metadata, grammar, style guides, so on and so forth. And both of these feed your docs from the outside in, which basically helps turn assistant conversations and user feedback and things of that nature into doc updates as well. The one thing I do want to also make sure to call out here is that if none of these fit, you all can also build custom automations for anything specific to your teams. But I am curious in the room, looking at this sort of suite of menu options for the pre-built automations, Is there any sort of automation that you would be inclined to turn on first? We'll give folks another second or two. Doc some code appears to be the most popular choice. It's just almost as if you already had insights into today's webinar. I'll definitely be showing that as part of the demo workflow. And that actually ties into like from a automations perspective, where I actually recommend that you all start first. So I think if you take one action away from this, make it this. If you're going to start with turning on an automation, just turn on a single automation. And I highly recommend the update from code changes. Why this one first? I largely recommend this one because the payoff is immediate. So the moment a pull request merges to your product repo, it's going to basically open a matching docs pull request for you to review. You'll see the value, and basically for you all, that basically ensures that you all see the value on your very next merge. And because you all are approving every change, there's zero risk again to your production environment. And so start a review mode first. And then when there's considerations for trying to figure out what do you leverage an automation for versus not, there's three things that I would not automate just yet. So first, if your docs don't have any structure, I'd highly encourage you to focus specifically on getting the foundation clean. So if the foundation is a mess, automation just makes that mess a lot faster. So definitely focus on fixing the structure first. Second, one-off rewrites. So if you have a task that you're doing and you're doing that task once and it's not something that's recurring, I don't recommend it for automations because automations again are meant for recurring tasks. And third, any judgment heavy pages. So if there's anything that like from a content perspective, you need to really ensure that the positioning, the brand voice, the messaging, things of that nature, anything that's going to basically need a human's hands on them from a content perspective, I don't encourage you to leverage automations for that either. Everything else should be fair game on your first automation. But I think most importantly, let me show you how this works. So I'm going to navigate over actually into our Mintlify production instance for automations. So when you go into Mintlify and you go into the home page, you'll navigate to this icon down here and you'll click on automations. From there, you'll basically be presented with the menu of options. So remember, if you recall, there's automations that are tied to self-updating content, and then you also have your maintenance automations. So for the purposes of today's demo, I'm going to show you the update from codes configuration settings. So I will click on the settings tab here. By default, when you go to click on, for those of you who are trying to follow along, by default, when you open the configuration settings for a update from code changes automation, it runs on a schedule. And so that is actually what we actually recommend. And by default, it's going to run twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, but you obviously have the ability to customize it there. And when it runs, the agent reads every single source code pull request that's merged since the last run. It's going to group those related changes together. It's going to then open a single coherent content pull request for you all to review. And the aha moment there is instead of you all getting 10 sort of tiny pull requests, you'll get one well-organized aggregated one. One detail I also love is that if there's an unmerged content pull request sitting there from a previous run, the agent doesn't open a duplicate pull request. It basically adds it to the new relevant changes, or excuse me, it basically adds that new relevant change to the existing pull request. And that ensures that your review queue can stay clean. The other option here outside of the custom schedule is merging or triggering the automation again when there's been a code change or when a PR has merged to your source repo. But again, best practice, highly recommend you start with the schedule run. So if you recall the context to trigger any action, this is basically how you are setting or defining the trigger. Next is the context. So this is where you'll list out all of your source repositories. I highly recommend that you, when you're thinking about which repos to add, you keep it as contained and as specific as possible. So basically, what you will want to do here is just ensure that you're selecting only the repositories that have the most context that will help aid the agent in any drafted content. The other thing to note, we also have this available integrations here. You can connect a number of things. So think about Slack, Linear. There's a number of different things that you can do here. And basically, what the agent will do is use them as additional context when trying to decide what to update. So if the reason behind the change lives in a Linear ticket or a Slack thread of some sort, basically the agent can pull that in. And that means for you all better judgment about what actually needs the document update, not just what changed in the diff. So to recap, when it comes to the settings, you have your scheduled run here, which could be on a cron job or it could be on a PR merge. You identify and specify your source repository as well as your context repositories. Input any additional integrations that are needed. And then lastly, you have this additional prompting down here. The underlying principle here was really that built-in prompt encodes your craft, right? Instructions encode the context. So craft is transferable across every customer, context is not. And so these instructions grow. So that's also why when you're configuring any sort of instructions inside of here, they grow that the way that they grow, they basically grow with you. So nobody should write them up front unless there's very specific context that you absolutely know you need to provide. What you want to do is you want to watch the first few pull requests, take a note of what you are consistently correcting by hand, and then turn each of those corrections into a rule. And then that instruction set is basically going to be your team's accumulated review feedback, but made more permanent, which basically means for you all that the automation genuinely improves with each use. And it's not because the model got smarter or anything of that nature. It's just because the context got richer ultimately. So let's actually take a look at what one of these PRs actually looks like. So I'm going to take a look at navigating here. We have a number of different automations that are in place here. So I'm going to go down and take a look at an updates from code changes pull request that was generated. It looks like for this specific one, we documented some additional IP allow lists for API keys. So what you can do here is you can first view these changes directly in the Mintlify dashboard. And what it'll do is it'll highlight or show you the diff in any addition. So any recommended content to add will be recognized in the diff here. And so you can see this green highlighting. And so basically what this is doing is this is showing you what the recommended content addition is. And this is sitting next to the live content that already exists. And so we can see here, there's a couple of sections around restricting the specific keys and additional context here to be added to this overall document. The other thing to note is that you can also take a look at this directly in Git. So if I click on publish and I click on view request, that's basically going to open up this same pull request inside of GitHub. What you'll be able to see here is a summary of the the proposed changes. You'll be able to see what specific changes were occurred. You'll be able to see the commits that are tied to the specific pull request. You'll also be able to see, and if you have any specific checks that are running against that pull request as well, you'll be able to see those. You'll also see from a files change perspective, again, what specific files, in this case, is these 4 markdown files that are being modified. So I think the call out here is that basically there's a number of different ways in which you can visualize the recommended draft content. When you're thinking about it, these checks are running like any other sort of pull request. So again, I've showed you basically how the file changes. It's in plain markdown. There's nothing proprietary about this. Your docs team will see a document. They'll probably live within the dashboard in terms of identifying the rendered content changes. Engineers will see a pull request. And so it's the same change and it merges throughout the same process like anything else that you ship. Now let's actually take a look at what a custom automation looks like. So if I go back to the Mintlify platform and I go back to automations, I want to show you this veil style audit. So for context, So for context, basically what we have here is one of the most recurring chores on any docs team is typically style cleanup. Here at Mintlify, we use Veil. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Veil, Veil is basically a style linter for pros. And so its job is to flag things like passive voice, inconsistent terminology, banned words on our style guides, things of that nature. The catch is that Veil warnings don't block merges. And so PRs can still land with warnings still attached to them. And over time, they can quietly pile up. And nobody wants to go through last week's PR merges and manually chase down style nits. So basically, what we did was we basically built an automation in Mintlify that does this for us. And so every week, it looks at the PRs merged to our docs repo in the last 7 days. It pulls out the outstanding veil warnings from the CI checks and it dedupes them, and then opens up basically a fix up pull request for each file that has warnings. And this ensures basically that the debt essentially gets paid down automatically instead of it accumulating over time. And so one thing I want to show you as it pertains to this particular one as well, for this particular automation, this is the configuration instructions that we put in here. So we've basically put in some very specific steps here to guide it. And also note, we've also put in very specific instructions such as do not change the content when making any sort of fixes. Is only pertain to style corrections, things of that nature. Again, you can prompt it as specific as possible to ensure that you get the outcome. But hopefully that's a relevant use case from a custom automations that would be relevant for you all. All right. So that's basically, in a nutshell, how you configure both the out-of-the-box automations as well as the custom automations. It's really just a loop. So if you recall, there's three settings. There's you defining the trigger, you defining the context, and you determining what action to take. Everything's going to have a readable diff as well as an associated git commit. And there's essentially nothing new for you all to adopt. Let's talk a little bit now about the Slack agent. So everything so far has been about automations. So basically docs stand in sync with your code. But really code is really only half of the picture in terms of where docs go stale. The other half is typically conversations. And so someone asks a question in Slack, an engineer explains a gotcha in a thread. None of that makes it back into the docs. That knowledge basically evaporates. The Slack agent is really meant to help close that loop. And so it's going to do three things, and each one is really more powerful than the last. It's going to answer, help fix, and create. So first, it's going to answer questions. So when you configure the Slack agent, anyone on the team can tag @Mintlify to ask about the product, the API, or just where do docs live for this. That alone will help kill a lot of interruption traffic. The answer comes back from the docs with a link, and instead of it'll come back basically directly from the agent instead of from whoever happens to be able to address it online at that moment in time, if someone happens to be online. Second is going to fix the docs, and this is an important one. So when a thread reveals that the docs were confusing or wrong, you don't file a ticket and just kind of hope that things play out for the better. What you have the ability to do is you can tag the agent right there in the thread, and it's going to draft the fix as a pull request. And that moment of confusion becomes really a moment of correction, while the content again is fresh and you have the right people that are still there in the thread. Third, it's going to create docs and threads. So let's say typical use case, support just spent 20 minutes or so resolving something that the docs never really covered. You can roll that entire thread into a new page. Their answer already got written. And basically what this will do is it just makes sure that it lands somewhere that's findable instead of dying off in the channel, or that historical content or context or knowledge is just sitting with that particular individual. And I think when you think about this, the part that really matters, if you're skeptical, nothing about the safety model changes, right? Automations, again, will handle the code. The Slack agent handles the conversations. And both of those will really land as a docs code change flow through Git. And so basically a doc fix that starts in Slack is still a commit, it's still versioned, it's still reviewed, and it's still revertible, which is just as important. And nobody's editing production from the chat window. The activation for the Slack agent is relatively light. And so basically what you'll do is you'll install the Slack app, you'll spin up a Mintlify runs channel or channel of some sort, adding your support and engineering folks, and that's really it. There's no migration, there's no process change or anything like that. And basically what it allows is the people closest to the customer confusion that gets surfaced from your docs. It allows them to become also the people closest to helping to contribute to fix it. So before we wrap, there's really four objections I constantly hear. And if you've been following along, you probably already know the answers to a lot of these. The first objection I typically hear is it'll publish the wrong content to production. It can't. Everything is a review first process. You saw it several times today. Nothing is going to ship again without a human approving a pull request. The second objection I typically hear is my engineers have to learn another tool. As you can see, this is still a part of the Git flow workflow. And so for folks who are already familiar with Git, they can live in Git. And for folks who aren't, or where Git isn't a part of the traditional workflow, they can also leverage Slack to help contribute to the updating of documentation. The third objection I typically hear, and this is one that's super sensitive and something we definitely take to heart, which is it replaces our writers. I'd argue that it actually does the opposite. Basically, what these automations are meant to help do is it should eat the style fixes and the sync chores so that writers can really spend their time doing the things that they care more about. Again, focusing on the judgment, the positioning, the structure, the voice of the documentation, things of that nature. That's the stuff we deliberately did not automate as part of designing this product. And then the last is just set up as a whole project. Just a simple automation, as you all saw from a configuration perspective, it's only a couple of clicks. And you all saw literally the entire activation a lot earlier today. And again, that's through the Slack chat, or excuse me, through the Slack app or channel. So in terms of next steps, what I encourage you to do is for those of you who are specifically, especially if you're interested in the code-based updates, turn on the code-based updates automation, trigger it on a pull request merge or a weekly cron if you'd rather have batch reviews, connect your product repos plus any of the context repos that the agent should read. And then lastly, keep the update mode on open APR. I do not encourage auto merge until you've watched a few PRs land and you're getting enough value that you're entrusted to just auto commit. Once you've done that, I then encourage you all to then pair it with the Slack agent. Highly encourage you all to do so that the conversations can continue to also help contribute and feed to the docs as well. And that's the only steps. There's a lot of content. There's been a lot of content today. And so I'm definitely curious for folks on the call, where do you all realistically see your next step today? I know a lot of folks are still, it looks like there's folks that are still under evaluation, which totally makes sense. And there are also folks who are much more interested in configuring the Slack agent. I think one thing I want to just call out for those of you who are still evaluating, one of the things that we want to do is book time with us to do a deeper dive demo. And what we'll do is we'll actually help you all configure the highest impact automation together and ensure that you all feel comfortable with the configuration and with turning it on. And also from a resources perspective, be on the lookout for your inbox. We'll recap a lot of the resources after the session so that nothing here depends on you all having to quickly or frantically take notes as we go along. But with that being said, I do want to open up the floor up to Q&A. So we'll try our best to answer questions. I think we have about 15 or 20 minutes or so. So we'll answer any questions that you all have live. And for anyone who has any questions that they weren't able to get addressed on the call today, be sure to note that either the customer success manager or AE or someone will follow up with you within 24 hours if we can't get an answer on the room. So with that said, I'll turn it over. All right. So we have a couple of questions in here. So the first question is, sell me on the benefits of using workflows via Mintlify versus setting up cron jobs and routines in, for example, Claude Codex and running on a local copy of the repo. Help me make the budget case to my VP. Ethan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, hello. This is Ethan here, for those of you who have met me. I maintain the docs here at Mintlify. I would say there's a couple reasons that the automations in Mintlify are valuable is first of all, you're already working in Mintlify. Not every team has access to Claude Codex, nor do they necessarily have the token budget. Whereas if you already have Mintlify tokens, you have already uh, purchased access to these automations in a tool you're familiar with. Uh, Also, in terms of configuring, setting up and testing a Claude Codex workflow does carry a maintenance burden. I think it's a wonderful skill to build and something very valuable. However, with all of the Mintlify automations, we are actively testing the prompts, adding new automations, and really treating the prompt almost like a software product. Like, yes, it's written in Markdown, but you need to be making sure that you're getting quality output. You need to be able to have it versioned so you can roll back if you try updating the prompt and it doesn't work. And really, you're letting us do most of that work. But then when you want a custom workflow, you have the option to add one whenever you would like.
Awesome. Thanks, Ethan. There was a question around, is there an integration with Microsoft Teams similar to Slack integration? Not yet. That is actually something that is underway with development. So we will soon start to support that. There's a question, can we get this PowerPoint for reviewing and sending it to our team? Absolutely. So all of the post this call, as I mentioned earlier, you'll get a copy of all of these resources along with the recording. And we'll also share some other relevant links that you can absolutely share out to your team for sure. One of the questions that was asked was, does the changes from code link to the pull request where that code changed for tracking and research? Ethan, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd be curious to follow up about the tracking and research question, but yes, the changes from code will cite the pull request that triggered the update. So you can see what led to that being created. It will also it can tag for review whoever created that pull request. If it was created by an agent, it won't tag that agent. So like if you have Devin, Claude, Codex, whatever, opening a pull request, um, it won't tag them. But if you have someone on your team who makes a pull request, they'll be brought in to help review as well.
Awesome. Thank you. There's a question. How about the screenshots? How do we capture screenshots of steps?
Yeah, I'll speak to this one as well, if you don't mind, Demarcus, where
Yeah, go ahead.
currently the automations do not update screenshots. And this is a somewhat deliberate decision for right now of the judgment required for screenshots and the way that different teams use screenshots is slightly more opinionated than we wanted to initially have automations be. Since you get into the questions of how do you prefer to do emphasis? Some teams want to do masking over screenshots, others don't. And generally, how you approach images in your documentation requires a lot of human judgment. Um, there are ways to automate like UI screenshots. However, it's going to look so very different for every team that it's not one of the initial automations that we started with.
Awesome. I see a question here. We have the docs repo in GitHub and the code in GitLab. How can I add the GitLab repo? I only see the option to add GitHub repositories.
Uh, I'll also say this is probably easier if we follow. It will include links to our documentation for setting up GitLab. In general, because there's not a GitLab app, it is slightly different steps. If you have your documentation in GitHub, however, and the code in GitLab, uh, that's not currently supported in automations. It needs to have the context repositories and the documentation repository on the same Git provider.
Awesome. We have another question here. Our support agent uses Zendesk. Can it read the chats on Zendesk tickets and update the docs?
See, I believe
We
Zendesk is not a currently supported third-party integration. We do support other help centers, so we can note this for our product team.
Awesome. There's a question, why do you need a Mintlify runs channel? Um, I think the short answer here is that basically for Mintlify, the reason we recommend that is because uh, with the automation runs, unlike normal agent interactions, unlike normal agent interactions, they are started by anyone in Slack. So basically, what you need is an agent. You need basically a pre-designated place to report back. And so when you mention the agent, it just responds in that thread, but the automations run the agent automatically on the schedule or in response to those changes in the repository. So basically, the idea here is that you're basically consolidating all of your designated things there. Ethan, it looks like you're also typing up a response as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up with like if you wanted to call it something else, you could name the channel whatever you want, but
Yeah.
having a designated channel.
There's a question, lots of comments about working with API docs. What about UI content and screenshots? Does the person who dropped this question, are you okay with like providing some additional context there? If not, we can definitely take this one offline.
I will share a little bit of that when it comes to UI content. Setting aside, like I mentioned, the screenshots, it will not update currently. However, for UI content, if that is changing because the front end code changes, the automation will build context from what changes there and can update. For example, like let's say labels change in your app, it will be able to see that the components underlying code changed and then update the names of the labels in the documentation. So UI content is covered as far as the pros goes.
There's a follow-up question to that. So they have a repo with their own UI code, so it has nothing to do with basically like the API spec. But it looks like,
Yeah,
Jen, it looks like you got your question answered.
yeah. So that should still be doable. In fact, I was reviewing a pull request yesterday for we just changed part of our dashboard and it updated all the labels for me.
Awesome. There's a question in chat. Is it possible to transfer all of the rules? Basically, looks like the markdown lint file for Veil, or they're like a markdown lint file to Veil. If not, is it possible to create an automation for markdown lint similar to the one you showed for Veil?
Yeah, I off the top of my head, I cannot remember every markdown lint rule. But yes, since they are both markdown pros linters, you can create the rules that exist in markdown lint as Veil rules. If you have access to an agentic coding tool, Claude, Gemini, whatever, having that do it for you is probably going to be one of the more efficient ways. Um, but yeah, Markdown lint is just a different approach to the same problem of prose linting, and it just uses a slightly different syntax.
So there was a question in chat. If I have a documentation monolith as well as documentation sets scattered across assorted other open source Git repos, how can I use Mintlify to automatically gather the docs from the assorted repos when they get updated and present them in the monolith repo?
This is probably best resolved on a call with your CSM because there's going to be a couple different approaches. The um, For anything that is a Git repo, if you have the Mintlify app installed on it, that can become context. You can have multiple repositories for any automation. Um, However, for the non-Git sources is where it gets a little trickier, where depending what they are, it may already be a supported integration that can also be added as context to the automation. But if it's not, then it would be more of a conversation to figure out how to get that information there. But for things like Slack, if you use Linear or Jira for project management, or if you have information that's in HubSpot, Google Drive, like a lot of those are already supported. Oh, questions solely to Git. Oh, okay. Sorry. I misunderstood when you said or not Git repos. I thought I meant non-Git repos. But yeah, so if it's other open source repositories, you can have the Mintlify GitHub app installed on multiple organizations and multiple repositories. So if everything is on GitHub or GitLab, you can build it as context.
Awesome. There's a question in the chat pertaining to integrations. Is there an integration with Figma files? Is it possible to add Figma frames directly from Figma files and then have automation to keep those up to date? We don't have a native Figma integration today. Um, there could be, this is one where we'll probably need to work offline. There could be something where you can take basically like live embeds and use those or static exports to basically keep it fresh by CI. So we'll take that one offline, Jackie, for you and see what we can do there. But to answer your question, we don't have a native integration today. And it looks like we have a question pertaining to um, additional prompting. So what information do you recommend including in the additional prompt for pre-built automations, specifically looking at the assistant conversation ones? That's actually a really good question. Ethan, you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say the majority of the time, I would start with you don't need to add anything additional, but that is more an approach to tuning the output. So if there is something on an automation pull request that you wish were different, adding it to the additional prompt is a way to steer it. Or if you do have some already very specific patterns, for example, in the assistant conversations, like if people are always asking about pricing information, but your documentation just doesn't go into pricing, you could add a note like disregard questions about pricing. So that's when you have that already quite established domain knowledge that you want to add to it, or iteratively just improving the output by tuning the prompt.
Awesome. That wraps up the live questions. Want to give folks, if there were any outstanding questions or things you all were lingering on, definitely want to give you an opportunity to ask them live. As mentioned, just in terms of next steps, we'll be providing you all with some additional resources as it pertains to automations. And we'll also be providing you all with an opportunity to do a deeper dive demo. And so encourage you all for folks that are on the fence or you're still kind of unsure if you have some lingering questions around maybe use casing, definitely encourage you to sign up. We're more than happy to do a deeper dive with you all to ensure your success. Um, Outside of that, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. I again want to thank everyone for spending time out of their busy morning, evening, afternoon, depending on where you are. And yeah, we'll be around if you need any additional assistance or have any questions. But hopefully this is of value to you all, and I'll catch you on the next one.